All right, so it does look like we're recording now. Welcome back again to Conversations from the Underground. It's been a minute. It's got to be at least how long? If not a semester, a summer, if not a year, pretty
Yeah.
damn, well, pretty close to a year. It's getting a long time since we recorded, but we're glad to be back. Hope you guys are interested in, probably whatever we're going to have going on today for the next hour or so. Again, if you're not familiar with how the format is established, my name is Eric Salas. We have Dr. Bradley Bujarity here, and we just kind of chop it up about God knows what. But we kind of let the conversation unravel or unfold as we see it, and then that's pretty much it. But outside of that, I'll go ahead and stop. Brad, if you want to say a couple things or whatever you got
Yeah,
going
man.
on, man.
It has been a while, and I've been really wanting to get back.
Hmm.
Especially these
For
last
sure.
2 or 3 underground meetings have been really nice. Good discussions. Good kind of like
Hmm.
thoughts at least. And I kind of thought it'd be good to try to get back into the habit of doing one of these after a underground meeting or maybe
Oh,
two.
gotcha.
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to think about, but so we carry on the conversation, man, because we get into so much stuff in these meetings, and it's hard to really give every topic enough justice. So, I mean, kind of like how we always do. We just start off talking what's on our mind, and we had a meeting today, So um, a lot of that stuff's been on my mind. But yeah, man, it's been good. Not only has the meetings been good, but the semester's been okay. We're in the mood. We're in the groove of things now, at least.
Hmm.
Uh, Halfway through by now. I mean,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I've been thinking about this idea of meaning. What we talked about today? The
Yeah.
Statue of Liberty.
So, yeah, today, well, for students who may not know or people who don't know, we've kickstarted the historical underground meetings. We've been meeting regularly every Friday at 11 a.m. right outside of our offices. So, for anybody that's watching this, and if you're interested in checking that out, you can hit us up via email. But we are at those offices, and this entire semester we've been focusing on the notion or the concept of meaning and how meaning changes, applies to different cultures, different communities, how different perspectives can inform meaning. And this particular Friday, we were discussing the symbols of the Statue of Liberty and the Berlin Wall, and how our perceptions of those two symbols might have an impact on the meaning of immigration. I think so. This was it was fairly complex
Yeah,
topics that were colliding together. Trying to harness the notion of meaning, applying it to a nationalistic symbol, an international symbol. Well, I mean, I'm saying national because the Statue of Liberty applies to the United States, and we're from the United States. But an international symbol in the Berlin Wall, and then somehow, some way, how does that apply to immigration?
yeah.
So, I mean, there was a lot, and there was no way in the world we were going to be able to cover that in an hour.
No, yeah, definitely. I think we did a good job of what we had. At least being able to think about these things and taking and connecting some dots. Yeah, I got an email, I guess, a couple of days ago from a student asking when y'all going to do another one of these podcasts, and
Hmm.
and kind of spurred me into kind of thinking about this, even though we've been wanting to do it for a while. I think when you get an email like that, you're kind of like, all right, let's get back to work.
Right,
Uh,
right.
so hopefully people who can't come to the meetings will be able to use this maybe as a way to uh, get familiar with what we're talking about. And the president has done a great job with getting us, um, I think, grounded and providing you with these discussion board opportunities on Canvas. So if you're out there and you can't make
Mm.
it to the meetings, you can, you know, at least participate in some of these discussion boards if you want. Yeah, man, I don't know. This notion, the Statue of Liberty, I think, is also a pretty significant international symbol. Kind of reminded me, the more I was thinking about it after the meeting, the more I kind of like, when I talk about the Cold War, there's this image that I like to use of like the United States flag and the Soviet Union flag, and they're kind of like mashed together, like they're struggling. Right. And you could almost sort of make that Berlin Wall be the image to symbol an international ideology, and the Statue of Liberty another one, in a way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the only reason I said national and then international, I think it's just because inherently I look at the Statue of Liberty and think, well, that's home. That's America. And, I definitely identify as an American. Of course, on top of a whole bunch of other things, but it seems more inherent than the Berlin Wall. So like when I think of the Berlin Wall and I'm aware of its importance in history and that conflict, it still to me has this international touch to it that I just don't resonate with for some strange. So I just, I'll just say national versus international. But no, you're right. Like the way other people their perspectives on the Statue of Liberty is, for a lot of people, is international. As we, or the notion that we invite immigrants to come to America, or at least that's what my take on the Statue of Liberty was, that it was this beacon for immigrants, that if you needed refuge, if there ever was a place you could go and, and experience that American dream, that was the, Statue of Liberty was the symbol of that. So I always took it as, something belonging to America. And so therefore I just said national, but yeah, for sure. It's definitely got an international play, because I mean, how many of our students are international students?
Yeah.
Sure. How many of them are first generation college students? And for them, all they know is what their parents has kind of expressed to them about what America is. And then of course, if they grew up here, maybe even going to school just a little bit, they're more in tune, I guess, or in touch with American culture because they've been through an American institution like a middle school or a high school. And so they're going to have different perspectives on America, probably.
Yeah, for sure. The more I think about it, the more I kind of take back that idea of the polar representations of them being opposites. I think Statue of Liberty is more of an international symbol of capitalism, really, because remember, you're like, you can come here if you need refuge, sure. but you didn't stop there. It was, you can come here and get refuge if you want to pursue your own interest and come out here and try to, live in this supposedly unobstructed type of economy, right, where you can kind of make your own choices more, apparently. And the Berlin Wall, I think now, actually is more of an international symbol of either division when it began or unification when it was torn down.
Yeah. So I would argue that the falling of the Berlin Wall is also an international symbol of capitalism.
Right.
So I mean that its failure or its fall could also be aligned with, I guess, what you're arguing the Statue of Liberty represents. Now, granted, its initial erection was obviously, to me, it seemed like the symbol of conflict, two opposing perspectives and ideologies on how economies and people should be treated. But
I've always wanted a piece of the Berlin Wall. I usually tell my students that in class if I can ever get a chunk. You ever I'd like that as a gift. It doesn't help your grade, but I'll keep it with me.
Yeah. The way I was,
and she has a middle name that's named after the Berlin Wall. My daughter.
Who? Oh, a friend of hers?
No, Meadow. My Meadow daughter. Yeah.
What's her middle name?
Her middle name is Berlin Kiana. So her name's Meadow Berlin Kiana.
Because of the Berlin Wall?
Yeah, as a representation of the Berlin Wall, as a reflection of world history.
Okay.
Significant symbol of unification. I don't know. There's a lot of, the word is interesting. The city's interesting. and how it became this dividing um, entity, if you will, between two entirely different social experiments, political
For sure.
experiments,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah. I took away, I mean, I look at it like, as I became more exposed with philosophy or in college, and my understanding of the Berlin Wall was it almost paralleled to, at least to me, like Plato's cave. Like
mm,
you have these people that are stuck in a cave, and because a lot of times when I looked at the Berlin Wall, I always understood it falling.
mm,
Um, and in that falling, you had people rushing to get across, and then all of a sudden they start sharing food, they start sharing music, and
yeah,
so now they're just now getting their hands on, like, I don't know, a Guns N' Roses,
yeah,
album or something crazy like that, something ridiculous like that. They're finally getting to listen to Queen or something ridiculous. That there were a group of individuals that were in the dark, and and then eventually they're let out of the cave, and they realize that this is how the world is existing in this um, free market uh, world.
yeah. I
At
was going
least
to
that.
say that these two representations, East and West, or a lot of people like to argue that I mean, capitalism won, as signified with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, but I think neither of the sides lived up to the standards by which they claimed to be. Neither, communism never existed. We never reached communism, right? And capitalism became more socialistic. Um, so both, I would I would argue, are like positive, maybe negative charges that are constantly
Mhm.
forces pulling at each other.
And that's a good point that you bring that up, because I never thought about it the way you just mentioned it, but almost immediately I resonate with that. And what I mean by that is the following: that we've never really had a communist state, and and my rationale behind that is because at its let's say that it was created at its infancy, it never really had the opportunity to properly mature, because it was immediately met with threats and conflict, resistance.
Right.
And so it never got the opportunity to develop and mature the way that capitalism did in the early parts of America. Like even in our so-called democracy, um, you know, isolationist policies allowed America to kind of uh, tweak this experiment that was taking place in the late 18th century, that we were developing this republic where we're giving power back to the people. There were moments where it could have gone awry, a lot of moments, but there weren't these existential threats to America's statehood at that moment that were. Now, don't get me wrong, we could point out a bunch of things, but I feel like capitalism never had the opportunity um, to develop without constant threat around it. And another analogy that I would bring to that would be like, imagine like a child who had, I'm sorry, an individual that becomes an adult but never had a childhood, because they had to grow up so quickly,
Yeah.
because of threats or circumstances that were uh, problematic or conflicting. And we look at these adults today and we notice, oh, you have these adults that never had a childhood. You can kind of tell that there's something odd or missing.
Yeah.
And I hate to make reference to celebrities in that regard, like child celebrities. I'm sorry, child stars when they
Yeah.
get older. I feel like communism never really had the freedom to mature. It was infancy and then immediate, uh, constant pressure and threat and
Yeah.
defense.
Certainly, I mean, because imperialism was already well established when they tried to establish this. They themselves became imperialists, and I think that's where the bigger problem lies in the fact that neither of these positions are what they say they are. I mean, first off, a communistic state is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a state that's communistic because communism is by definition the absence of the state. People have learned how to cooperate and live to each according to his need, from each according to his ability. You've just learned how to uh, help produce for the greater good and take a minimum amount. No one's ever really learned that to get to the point to cooperate to the point where the state disappears. Instead, the state just got bigger. And much of it got bigger out of threat for protection, paranoia, and all this fear that they were able to use. Not to mention the fact that power oftentimes corrupts people, and they begin to do things that keep them powerful. So there's all kinds of problems with that scale. And then, but on the other side, capitalism, it oftentimes takes credit for things that if you widen the historical lens, you see it differently. Like power to the people only if you're removing Indian people so that you can give the power to these people on their land,
Right,
or
right,
labor only if you're able to get these other people who don't count and make them work to invest $2 billion into this industry of enslavement for the first 100 years of the country's existence. I mean, $2 billion were invested in the slave market in 1860. Do we understand
right.
what that means? Because, like, I mean,
Well, no, wait a minute. We don't want to conflate capitalism, because when we say power to the people, that's more of a governmental apparatus and ideology, whereas capitalism, in its purest sense, is an economic model by which we allow the free market to dictate um, price, consumption, value,
right.
to influence the economy,
And
which should be
the government has to exist to not obstruct the economy, and the people have the power to decide their interactions
right.
is what right.
Yeah,
um
and so it's not a government,
right.
so like it and I think in it, when I look at capitalism in its purest form, it was this notion that um you know the value of things will be informed by its people, by its citizens, and unfortunately the institution of slavery um was already in existence, and it was easy to find out that the institution of slavery magnified your ability to escalate up that capitalistic scale when you exploit. And like you said, it's not power to the people, it's only power if you're able to exploit other people for their power, their possessions, their resources. And so, I mean, you can definitely see a lot of overlap, but I would imagine, and in the way I take capitalism, is that yeah, you're right. I do think that it never it never it never became what it espoused itself to be, and I think a lot of that is because human nature, power of government entities and officials kind of superseded that. Like um, the wealthy ends up influencing and, if not, becoming the government apparatus, whereas in other places around the world, like if you had a theocracy, religious leaders end up becoming also the governmental leaders.
Right.
Whereas in the United States, it's your wealthy
Oh, elect.
class that end
Right.
up becoming these governmental leaders. And again, it's to maintain that wealth class at the expense of the proletariat or the unwashed masses or whatever you want to call them. Whereas in a theocracy, you maintain the religious leader class amongst a bunch of unwashed religious followers in a theocracy.
Mhm.
But I nonetheless, those two definitely overlap a lot. But I think it's when we talk about communism, it almost immediately goes to, and I don't know how I feel about it. Like communism just always presented to me more so like this hybrid of economic and political ideology, whereas capitalism could be purely economic. But maybe it's just my biased perspective because all I know is American.
Yeah, no. So like the state, there's a state that's created in order to achieve both. So capitalism is a system, and the United States was a state that was trying to promote the use of to implement capitalism in its state. The Soviet Union claimed to be trying to lead towards communism, and the state was there to try to guide the people there. They never made it. Just like in the United States, they never made it. If by capitalism, free market, classical liberalism, we mean the market will work itself out, competition
Mhm.
will help eliminate exploitation. These things, there's never been a moment in our history where the capitalist system is not being fueled by exploitation. We
Right.
just have an uncanny ability to pretend like it doesn't matter when we don't want it to. We pretend like it doesn't matter that we're not complicit in the murder of a lot of people in Congo while we use our iPhones, in the
Mhm.
same way that people in the 1860s were pretending like they weren't doing something immoral by investing in the transatlantic slave trade.
Right.
So you see, capitalism has this exploitative engine about it. Communism is trying to eliminate this exploitative element. Socialism is somewhere kind of like in a range of these two. Socialism, I don't see more as an economic system, as more as a philosophy, social society ism, the philosophy of trying to fix the problems in society. Right now, that's what we need
Mhm.
to talk about Marxism, because this happens a lot at this stage. Because we got a question, I think, or a comment, I can't remember, in the meeting today about something about Marxism, right? And
Mhm.
we see this a lot in the political discourse, right? I mean, what Trump calls her a communist, uh,
Right.
and they call him a fascist, because communists and fascists are the diabolical opposition of each other, right?
Right.
And so they try to swing each other onto these pendulums. When the fact of the matter is, Trump isn't nearly as tough enough to he may wish he could be a fascist, but he certainly isn't one. I don't think he has the if he was a fascist, the way a fascist works, he wouldn't have failed in the January 6th riots, right? And he wouldn't have to
Mhm.
be saying, "Oh, I didn't do this, I didn't do that," right? He likes to flirt around with fascism, and and maybe the Democrats like to flirt around with rhetoric from communist or equal the equality aspect of the philosophy of communism. But I think Marxism gets messed up in here. Like, everyone who disagrees with free market capitalism is not a Marxist. Um, Marx didn't start all of this. Marx is not a god. I mean, like, people are Marxism. Marx said nothing about communism hardly, and he
Mhm.
died really before he even really started talking about. He called it like the fifth stage of development in history. Like people start out as tribes and then turn into slave societies, then feudal societies, then bourgeois capital societies, and then communist societies. We don't know what that communist society really is going to look like yet, and he thought maybe we were in the middle of being pushed to that society. But I mean, that right there is flawed itself. Like, I mean, Sven Becker's book Empire of Cotton shows excellently. He calls it war capitalism to describe how slavery and capitalism aren't separate stages in historical development. Marx and his era uh, were very specifically nuanced to the world in which they were writing about. And when politicians try to label people today outside of the context in which Marx was writing, it just, you know, you got to like shut that. You're wasting your time. You're not even talking. You got to understand the conversation's not in the right place. Like, you understand what I'm trying to say?
No, for sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, and if anybody is wasting their time, or if the conversation is not in the right place, the person wasting their time would be the individual um, that listens to to a politician labeling another individual as a communist or a fascist, because obviously those labels are extremes. And in this country, I would argue, and the reason why Trump is merely cosplaying as a fascist, like you said, flirting as a fascist, because the system, and again, maybe it's just my own bias. I believe the system is so uniquely constructed. It's it's damn near impossible for him to be a fascist. I mean, you would have to have this odd alignment of circumstances. The fact that, like at the end of the day, even with the January 6th thing, you had you had a legislative branch, you have the judicial branch. They're not really doing anything anyways, but the legislative branch, they were appearing under attack, or they were under attack. They were all, hiding away at the notion of people coming in at the Capitol. But at the end of the day, you had individuals that were saying, "Yo, this shouldn't be happening. We need to do something about this." You had people rise up and kind of put that down. You have today, a justice system um, indicting a former president, ultimately convicted 34 times of felony, that are felony charges. And that kind of shows you that our system would not allow a fascist element to take place, because, like you said in our meeting, we may be riled up for the moment,
Right.
but man, I still got to go back to work. I gotta,
Right.
I gotta go clock in. I
Right.
got to check to cash. I got money to spend,
Right.
and the oddity of enterprise in America kind of quells revolutionary attitudes, whether
Right.
they be communistic or fascist.
Let me point this out here, because we like to think that, the United States won, or free market capitalism won, or the Statue of Liberty won when the Berlin Wall fell. And a lot of people even like to credit Reagan for these things, which is even more hysterically interesting, in my opinion, because it fell from within. I mean, Eastern Europe and people who were being confined by the government, finally it began to implode. It was more like, the Smurfs and hippies and Metallica and shit like that caused the collapse. It was a cultural phenomenon. But there was a really good book by Francis Fukuyama called The End of History that I think also points to this point I'm trying to make. Like, we like to think that we won because this idea where we got money to spend and we got jobs to go to, um, but maybe we're becoming a little too complacent with all this comfort. It's interesting because my son, I've been talking to him a lot more when he gets to bed at night before he goes to sleep to wake up to do the next kung fu practice every day. He's in China, and he notices a lot of difference in the way people are. And I remember when he first went there, they were in a struggle because the government passed a law that didn't allow foreigners to stay in these temples anymore, and so they were kind of like in a hotel, and he was kind of in between places for a couple of weeks. Then he got to his new place, and they came up with these new laws, requirements for him, and he's like, you have to be in your bed by 10 o'clock every night. You can't be outside. And he was like, Dad, I didn't really have any reason to want to, but it just like bothered me when they told me I couldn't. Like, it made me want to. Like I felt confined. I felt choked. I
Mm-hmm.
felt and I was like, this is your Americanism for sure. Now it's starting to your cultural lens of freedom. And my dad talks about it all the time. He remembers my daughter saying, or his daughter saying to him, we're growing up, don't tell me what to do. I'm free. Don't tell me. And he just was so shocked, like you would get your ass beat. Don't talk like
For
that,
real.
right? Like there's all
Hmm.
these different cultural ramifications that come with all this freedom. And Aiden was telling me, which I didn't even really know this for sure. I'm still trying to check. But he said that you don't have a right to vote in China. He didn't know. I don't know for sure if that's all around or if it's just for president or what. And he said something like, "I just don't know. I mean, the way I look at these Chinese people going on walks, eating better vegetables, so much cheaper. Um, I don't know. I'm starting to like it there. He's starting to adapt more." And I'm thinking, well, look, when you first got here, you didn't like it, right? You were struggling.
Hmm.
Why? Not because where you came from was right and where you are is wrong, but because where you came from is familiar and is culturally molded to your consciousness, and where you're going is different and fearful and strange. And it's an adaptability quality. We're not. I'm not out here to try to tell you that the East Germany was better than West Germany, or West Germany was better than East Germany. We're telling you to try to understand the world. Like I know the people who grew up in East Germany and then eventually came to the United States do amazing for themselves. People who
Hmm.
survive in communist, so-called communist countries and then immigrate to the United States do a hell of a lot better than themselves. One of my cousins is big time, got a lot of money, and he came here working 3, 4 jobs at once, but he doesn't spend any money. He doesn't have the same desires and passions for I got to go buy this, got to make this money, got to spend it. And it's almost like we're killing ourselves on purpose or something. It's almost like it gives you the illusion of freedom and makes you feel so free to go do what you want. But meanwhile, we're going to plant all these landmines around you, some of which you can't even see. Others, if you're smart enough, you'll be able to watch somebody else fall in it and make your adjustments. But we like to say that this is the great and best path, and that the whole world should follow our line of reasoning. And to me, that's just a lack of understanding of culture.
It for sure. Um, but what I found interesting was it sound like this illusion of freedom, and it sounds like both places will definitely sell you an illusion of freedom.
Sure.
In America, the illusion of freedom is just as you pointed out that here you can make your money and you can buy the things and you can be avarice and want it all because you can do that here. But with that, you lose a sense of freedom in the sense that, oh, now I have to go to work. I need to pay attention to who the politicians are. I need to go and vote because that's going to influence how free I feel in this environment. Because you just mentioned with Aiden that, well, I don't get to vote, or maybe not everybody gets to vote, but
Yeah.
I think I do enjoy the culture because we have fresh food. I get to walk outside, and because what that sounded to me like he was willing to forego political freedom for the sake of things that are intrinsically of value to him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that implies that the culture that he values is aligned with what's going on over there. Whereas people have a perception of being aligned with having material possessions here. And
Yeah.
even though the grind of getting those material possessions actually is way more stressful, makes you feel less free.
Right. You need more.
But
Every time you get more, you need
and,
more.
and that's fine. But I still think both sides are definitely giving you this illusion. You see, because at the same time, Aiden still feels like, well, no, why do I have to be in at 10 p.m.?
Yeah.
Because the the freedoms he values are more aligned there than the freedoms that are valued here, which I personally I respect. Now it implies though that maybe me and you and Aiden have the same values, and you say that these values are influenced by culture, but yet notice that we're in different two different places, but yet we could share the same culture. Notice that you and I are different ethnicities, but we could share the same culture. we're different races, but we can share the same culture because our values somehow, some way, are aligned. And I would argue, like there are a lot of people who want to come to the United States are under the perception their values are different too. Their values are attached to the notion that, well, if I have more money and if I have more opportunities to have more money, then I will feel more free. But in reality, we know that that's not the case.
Right.
I just feel like both sides are giving you this illusion. You just are willing to accept
and there's ways
the
to
illusion because you're more aligned with it.
I mean, and there's ways to be successful in both worlds. The key, I think, is to figure out how to navigate through cultures with more values than you're accustomed to. The more you do this in life, the I feel more content you become, I think, because you have a stronger awareness of lived experience and life itself and how it functions and how it develops. And you're not so confined to your own cultural lens where you're just surrounded by your own values that you think your values are inert or innate or a priori to human experience, when in fact they're culturally constructed within the social dynamics of societies that develop over millennia. And when you step out of your culture and enter another one and go through that rough stage and adapt and survive and mold, then it opens your mind more. I think that's one of the keys in life is to be able to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Now, granted, it takes it takes a little bit of privilege to even experience culture to that degree. If you have books, you can experience culture. If you have access to technology, you can experience culture. If you have the ability to travel, of course, that's the number one way to experience culture, or interact with people from different walks of life. And in America, that's definitely the case. Because I promise you this: wherever he is in China, he's not running into an African American individual, is he?
Yeah.
Probably not. Really?
Yeah.
See, now, because I can walk down the street in Arlington and run into a Pakistani, I can run into a white guy, I can run into a black guy, I can run into a Mexican, I can run into a national, I can run into an immigrant. In America, there's obviously this diversity that affords us this cultural lens that you're talking about. Now, one thing I did find interesting about what you were getting at was there is this way to circle back to the notion that communism never got that opportunity that you just stressed, that when you're trying this new culture out, there is this initial moment of discomfort, but you ultimately grow into being, like you were getting at, this better, more socially aware, more compassionate individual, a better person. And I feel like communism never had that opportunity because um, it was met immediately with threats.
Yeah.
And then ultimately fell apart, like you said, from within.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
never got that opportunity to mature.
The first sentence, I believe, of the Communist Manifesto is something to the effect like, there is a specter that is haunting Europe, right? That specter is communism, where everyone is ready to destroy it because the people who had the power didn't want to relinquish it. And so when we've had experiment, so this book comes out in 1848. That's not when communism begins, for sure, but that scientific socialism. Marx would be like one of the founders of scientific socialism. There were a lot of others before him, but ironically, the United States was where all the small communist experiments occurred throughout the countryside. The Owenites, the Fourier community that was out here in Oak Cliff in the 1840s, called La Reunion.
I'm talking about like these what did we have them in the 1830s and 40s? What do we call them? These these
utopian.
societies. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
utopian type societies.
I mean, what is communism other than this utopian world in which people have learned to cooperate in a way that they're not exploiting each other? They never have worked whenever they've tried to work, because maybe some would argue it's not in human nature, or others would argue that there were too many forces of power attacking the idea. Um, Fred Hampton would argue that it was education, right? You need education. But what kind of education? The type of education that the Soviets tried to employ was like socialist realism, right? I kill you if you don't believe this.
Hmm.
And why did they
Sounds like
have, hard to say, but everybody's invading them, like you said. They don't have a lot of time. Leninism uh, began in strife and struggle and death emanating everywhere around you. His brother was executed by the Tsar. He saw that when he was a kid. Like, these people had been abused so much, and they inherited this abuse. I mean, Russia has just been in utter chaos. You can't use that model as an example of how socialism fails or communism fails, because, like you said earlier, it was under attack from the moment that they attempted it, for a number of different reasons, which I think means, you don't think about these operating ideas as right and wrong. You see them as I said earlier at the beginning of this thing, something like a gravitational pull between them, in a way. Like, maybe this is a good example. When I'm talking to my students about the Cold War, I like to say the Soviet Union on one side, the USSR, and then the USA on one side. And imagine these being two big magnets, and the world are a bunch of little pieces of metal, and they're just sort of like squeezing in to try to get those pieces of metal to step up to their side, and they're
right.
constant struggle there. It's almost like these are two opposing forces, um, that are feeding off of each other, that are taking from each other, building on each other. Because, of course, the United States certainly is not a full laissez-faire capitalist society today, nor
No,
has it really been, actually.
no,
And when it came
no.
came out, it's straight jacking people from land and then auctioning
And
the
money.
off to people. I'm taking this land from you, and I'm auctioning it off
Mhm.
to these people, and I'm giving it to you to build a railroad. That's not laissez-faire.
Yeah.
That's
There's no
smashing.
hands off there. There's a hands on almost immediately. Yeah. No, definitely smash and grab. Yeah, I was thinking about it like a second ago regarding that whole notion of communism not having a fair start, or like just a fair, like, almost like if you were planting something in the garden,
Yeah.
and like, and you wanted to plant something, like something that was not, I don't want to say fragile, but something that required a great deal of, it required an environment
Right.
that was suitable, and
Right.
then you had nothing but an ice storm for the next 3 months. You think anything's going to grow there properly?
Right.
And even if something did grow, it never grew. It never grew with um, the a natural or sincere environment where you could see the fulfillment of that fruit.
Right.
I feel like communism was just that.
Well,
And
yeah. I
so,
mean,
that's an interesting take that you brought up initially from the jump, is that there's no such thing as a communist state, because that's automatically going to get people like, what are you talking about? There was no communist state. That's like someone saying 2 plus 2 isn't 4. But we'll talk about, that's the old stuff that we were talking about a long time ago. But um, it's a very interesting point.
yeah.
Um,
Said about the garden analogy, I would enhance it by using soil. If you try to plant a garden in contaminated soil, it's not going to grow right. And if you do grow something out of it, it's not going to be healthy for you to eat. You got to take care of the soil and spend time healing the soil if you want to plant something in it. And so essentially, what happens is these communist, or the Soviet Union, this philosophy of communism that it was trying to employ, was being planted in contaminated soil.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and maybe capitalism was the same way. Maybe,
Sure.
because remember initially you said that neither really were able to live up to their, I guess, intentional ideals.
Right. Right.
So, and what's crazy is that I would imagine this conversation would have gotten to this point or during the meeting, but man, those hour meetings just ain't enough.
No, man, that's what exactly. That's why I had this idea of using when we can this format um, to extend the conversation when we need to.
Yeah, for sure.
And I completely forgot that we usually end with a quote. And I don't even have I don't even have my quote thing up, but I know we got to dip early today.
For
But
sure.
for some reason, there's a quote that just keeps coming to my mind from Lenin, where he says, "Sometimes history needs a push." I think, kind of in a way, is interesting. That it kind of reflects uh, the lack of push behind the American comfort, non-revolutionary mindset. It's also a farce in a sense that Marx tries to argue that the structures are there, but then it's also quite profoundly true in the sense that we, as our culture, is the push. We move things forward based off our culture. And sometimes we try to have ideas like Lenin had, and he tried to push them into bad soil. Just like maybe capitalism in the same way. But
yeah, when you said when you're making that quote with Lenin and you said just needs a little push or whatever.
Yeah.
The first thing that came to my mind was The Dark Knight.
Oh.
Because the Joker towards the end of the movie, he said madness is a lot like gravity. All it takes is a little push.
Yeah.
And I guess the substitute here would be with Lenin making the argument that history just needs a little push. Maybe capitalism got pushed.
Yeah.
Maybe capitalism is madness. Maybe communism is madness. I don't know, but I mean, it's interesting. I think that I'm imagining, I'm reimagining that entire script and how that could have been influenced by thinking of history, thinking of ideologies, economic systems. But that's probably just me reading into it and stuff.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, this is good, man. I'm glad we're back online. Hopefully we can keep it going. But usually we go longer. But I know you got to get you
Yeah.
So we'll catch up later.
All right, man. Sounds
Peace,
good.
y'all.
And we'll catch up.
Till
Take
next.
it easy. Yes, sir.